Bill, Mr. Chairman, to the subcommittee for your consideration and approval. I'd like to first of all begin by thanking Ranking Member Joe Serrano. It's a privilege to work with you. We're delighted you're back on the subcommittee. This, I think, is the best of all the subcommittees. I know, Mr. Rogers, you'd agree with that, of the subcommittees on appropriations. It's a privilege to work with you. Mr. Serrano, I know you believe, as I do, that there need to be additional funds in certain areas. And as we move forward through the process, as additional funds become available, we hope they will, we'll have an opportunity to perhaps backfill some of those holes. But I particularly want to thank my chairman and dear good friend Rodney Frillingheisen for the trust you've imposed in me and chairing this wonderful subcommittee, and deeply appreciate.
We know it's well placed.
It is. It's a joy for me to do this job. This is a job I want. It's fabulous. It's the best subcommittee in the on appropriations. Thank you, sir.
This is live here. You better.
Right. We are very lucky to have Chairman Rogers, the former chairman of the subcommittee, and our former full committee chairman, and particularly pleased also to have the help and guidance of Nita Lowy, our ranking member of the full committee. I know how much she cares about the jurisdiction of this subcommittee and the work that we do. We have diverse responsibility over federal law enforcement, enforcing our trade laws, forecasting the weather, managing fisheries, advancing science, and one of the best parts of all, exploring space and expanding the boundaries of human knowledge about our universe. The bill we're considering today provides $54 billion in discretionary funding, which is $2.6 billion below fiscal year 17, and we had to spread those reductions where we could, but protecting our priority programs such as federal law enforcement and space exploration and scientific research. We have provided the FBI with $8.8 billion, which is $92 million over the budget request, and focusing those resources on cyber espionage, fighting terrorism, and on fighting human trafficking. The threats against our national security are real and evolving, and we've done our best to make sure the FBI has the resources they need to address those problems. We've also provided funding for 65 new immigration judge teams to reduce the intolerable immigration backlog. $22 million increase for U.S. attorneys, an $88 million increase for U.S. Marshals, a $98 million increase for DEA, and a $35 million increase for ATF to make sure that our nation's streets are as safe as possible. We've also increased funding for priority state and local law enforcement programs, violence against women, prevention and prosecution programs, the Burn JAG program, state criminal alien assistance program. I'm particularly pleased we were able to provide a $19.9 billion funding level for NASA, the highest in the history of the agency. That's a $218 million increase. NASA has had far too much on its plate for too long and too little funding. And I'm determined to see that turned around and take NASA above and beyond the glory days of Apollo. We made sure that the Space Launch System is fully funded, that astronauts will have the ability to go beyond low Earth orbit in the Orion crew vehicle. We've also made sure that the United States of America will be the nation best positioned to discover life on another world for the first time on the ocean worlds of the outer solar system, and in particular on the moon of Jupiter, Europa. We have not adopted the proposed cut to the National Science Foundation, and we fund basic science research, which is so fundamental for our nation. Funding for NASA prioritizes weather forecasting, weather research, ocean exploration, and fisheries. And however, in order to live within our allocation, we had to reduce funding in some areas. We've eliminated programs that are no longer necessary or not critical to the operation of the federal government, while freezing programs for several agencies that can operate with a little less. The bill includes numerous oversight protections to protect our constituents' very scarce, very precious, and hard-earned tax dollars, such as requiring each agency to submit a spending plan, Mr. Chairman, and capping life cycle costs for poorly performing programs, requiring agencies procuring sensitive IT systems to conduct a supply chain risk assessment in consultation with the FBI, a program first begun by my predecessor, Frank Wolf. Frank very wisely and with great foresight recognized the problems with cyber intrusions. We also require additional performance reporting, Mr. Chairman, from troubled agencies such as the Census Bureau and the Executive Office for Immigration Review. Finally, our bill includes Second Amendment protections and language that will prohibit the transfer or housing of Gitmo prisoners in the United States, as we've had for many years. I want to thank all the subcommittee members for their input in the bill and their participation in the hearings, and I want to recognize Mr. Serrano for any comments he would like to make as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is my first year back as a ranking member of the CJS subcommittee, And I think we need to have a clarification. CJS stands for Commerce, Justice, Science, not for Congressman Jose Serrano. And so the committee is not named after me. Oh, sorry. I couldn't help myself. And I just want to take a moment to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being so welcoming in my return as ranking member. I've been a part of this subcommittee for a long time, and I'm glad to see that you have continued the bipartisan traditions of Chairman Wolf and Chairman Rogers. Although we don't agree on everything in this bill, you have always tried to be fair to our side and to find common ground where it is available. I also want to take a moment to thank staff on both sides for their hard work on this bill. They were given a challenging circumstances in which to draft a bill and report this year, so it is a testament to their dedication and commitment that they have once again risen to the occasion. I wish we could be here in other circumstances. After scorekeeping adjustments, the bill includes approximately a 1% cut from fiscal year 2017. This funding level is inadequate, given the key roles that the agencies under this subcommittee play in securing our nation, promoting economic development, and ensuring our leadership in scientific endeavors. That has resulted in some difficult choices by the majority, many of which I do not agree with. Before I detail my concerns, let me point out some of the important investments that this bill makes. The chairman's mark rejects some of the Trump administration's worst proposals. That includes rejecting cuts to National Science Foundation research and the Minority Business Development Agency, both of which are held flat here. There's an increase included for both the FBI and the ATF, which have critical law enforcement roles. The bill also largely rejects efforts to cut funding for the educational efforts at both NSF and NASA, which help inspire and train our next generation of scientists. But I'm concerned that several other programs and agencies are not funded properly. The Legal Services Corporation is cut by $85 million from FY 2017. As a strong supporter of LSC, and I must say that years ago I worked very closely with Chairman Rogers to make sure that this remained in the budget when people wanted to get rid of it. I think it is very unwise. LSC grants help local providers assist veterans, domestic violence victims, the elderly, and many others to assert their rights. The LSC plays a crucial role in ensuring that our legal and constitutional rights are available to all Americans, not just those who can afford it. I hope we can work together, Mr. Chairman, to increase this amount as we go along. Programs that conduct crucial climate change research are also shortchanged in this bill. There is a 19% cut to NOAA climate research, and NASA's Earth Science program is cut by $217 million below last year and $50 million less than what the Trump administration requested. The result is that we will jeopardize our ability to improve our scientific understanding of our planet and its changes. This will undermine our ability to protect the health and safety of our communities. The Justice Department is underfunded in a number of critical areas. The bill largely eliminates cops hiring grants, a program which is very popular on both sides of the aisle. It is deeply troubling that this effective program, which supports important police reform and public safety initiatives, is being tossed aside. I'm also troubled by the proposed elimination of two crucial juvenile justice grant programs, the state formula grants and the delinquency prevention incentive grants. These grant eliminations, among others, will harm efforts to reduce crime, promote police-community relations, and prevent recidivism. The Census Bureau is also inadequately funded, and that's an important one for all of us. It should be. Although the periodic census and programs account as giving the requested amount of FY 2018, the Trump administration shortchanged the important planning and testing tools that are needed now to prevent higher costs in the future. Without the crucial testing now, the initial rate will drop and costs will rise. The Trump budget in this area is penny wise and pound foolish, and I think we need to do more to correct this mistake. The President also proposed ending federal support for Economic Development Administration programs and the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program. While the Chairman's mark does not copy that proposal, it still contains huge cuts to both of these programs. These programs help create and retain tens of thousands of American jobs every year. Lastly, I'm also troubled that this proposal allows several of the administration's immigration enforcement priorities to go forward, including new attorneys for eminent domain proceedings along the border and additional attorneys for criminal immigration prosecution efforts. At best, this is an unwise choice. 52% of criminal prosecutions at DOJ are already immigration-related. There is a practical limit to how much we can do before we intrude upon the other important missions of the department. Before I conclude, let me also mention a few troubling riders that are included in the bill. There's a rider to prevent the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office from approving trademarks for any company that has confiscated property in Cuba. Here we are again discussing Cuba. It's amazing how it never goes away. Aside from harming our diplomatic efforts with Cuba, this is an impossible standard that the office says they cannot meet. The bill also includes a rider to prevent an ATF demand memo on multiple long gun sales along the border from being enforced. This rider will harm public safety. And lastly, the bill attempts to make permanent 4 annual gun-related riders. I think that these riders undermine eventual bipartisan compromise. I hope, Mr. Chairman, that we will be able to find the common ground necessary to reach bipartisan compromise as this bill moves forward. That starts with increasing funding for domestic spending priorities, including in this bill. But as it stands, I cannot support this legislation in its current form. But I always like voting for this bill, and I wish we could return to the days when Hal Rogers and I would look at the board and guess whether it was going to be 300 or 350 votes that the bill would get in the House. I think we could do it if we take care of some needs that our sides and both sides believe are important for the American
Get a big
people.
budget deal. We'll get that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Serrano. It's my privilege to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Fillingheisen of New Jersey.
Well, thank you, Chairman Culbertson, for your unbounded enthusiasm and leadership of this committee, working with Mr. Serrano. One of the reasons I was late is I was Mr. Serrano's personal escort from the Capitol over to this committee. I usually believe in meetings starting on time, but it was good to keep your company, and you obviously worked up your repertoire
Yes.
to provide some degree of entertainment, because
As we write home every week on the same
well,
way.
let's not talk about that too much.
Yes.
Let me just say, I want to thank, obviously, Mr. Serrano and the chairman for all the good work and the fantastic staff work that was done to put this together. A lot of time and effort done in a relatively short period of time, and I hope that all those good people have been accessible to you. Certainly, I know they have been to the members. I'm going to exercise my prerogative as chair and reserve more of my expansive remarks, not in praise of you, but on the bill, at the full committee markup. Certainly, our first responsibility as members of Congress is the safety and security of our people. We obviously know our nation is facing increased threats here at home, and federal law enforcement is essential to confronting those threats and make sure that those who do us harm are brought to justice. The bill increases funding, as you're aware, for law enforcement, hopefully making sure they have the resources. And yes, in addition, the legislation includes important investments to boost U.S. scientific innovation and will maintain our global leadership. And may I say, some of my favorite agencies are in here, so I'm glad that you've done your level best to fund them and support them. So I urge its adoption and appreciate the work that you've done.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To recognize the ranking member, Ms. Lloyd.
Is it on?
Should turn green around the base.
Thank you.
Green is on, red is on.
Green is good.
Ah. Thank you for your direction, for your support. Thank you, Chairman Culberson. Chairman Frelinghuysen, Ranking Member Serrano, thank you so much for all your good work on this bill. Mr. Chairman, while I am sure some members are pleased that we are moving forward through subcommittee markups, we really shouldn't be patting ourselves on our back, because even as we consider this bill, which cuts priorities critical to the security and sustainability of our communities, the majority has still failed to advance a budget resolution or articulate any semblance of a plan to keep the government funded and avoid a debt default in the fall. Enacting appropriations law to keep the government funded is among the most basic responsibilities of government, and a key responsibility of this committee, this Congress, and despite Republican control of both houses of Congress, we are not on track to do that on time. This failure has consequences for every bill that this committee considers, including Commerce, Justice, and Science. The CJS bill before us would provide $65 billion in new discretionary spending for fiscal year 2018. For federal investments in commerce, justice, and science, it means a cut of more than $500 million below FY17. And within this bill, while several items are funded at good levels, there are a great many other items of serious concern. For instance, the COPS program deceptively shows an increase of $12.5 million. Resources and responsibilities have been shifted to create an illusion of robust funding, all while eliminating the COPS hiring program. Once again, a number of gun riders, including language blocking a reporting requirement on multiple purchases of rifles or shotguns, would prevent law enforcement from sensibly addressing gun concerns. While this bill doesn't completely eliminate the Economic Development Administration, as President Trump recommended, it still cuts EDA grants by an unworkable $97 million, or 41%. EDA receives support from both sides of the aisle because it creates economic opportunity in many of our districts that would be jeopardized by these cuts. Other deficiencies include an $85 million cut for the Legal Services Corporation, which provides vital civil legal assistance for Americans in need. This is a particularly cruel step by the majority. Providing only a slight funding increase for the census will cause enormous problems. We are 3 years away from the 2020 census, and the inadequate funding level requested by the Trump administration and provided in this bill would greatly reduce the ability to carry out this constitutional requirement in a cost-effective manner, and will surely result in increased costs in the future. And this bill cuts NOAA, climate research, by 19%. Further proof that the Republican majority doesn't take the science of climate change seriously or have any intent to combat one of the great threats of our time. As in other bills, the majority has included a number of other current controversial riders, including on trademarks in Cuba. Despite numerous shortcomings, the bill provides modest increases for burn justice assistance grants. However, the mark still has a long way to go when it comes to Violence Against Women Act programs and the NICS background check system. These vital programs are essentially flat-funded and must be increased to adequately serve and protect our communities. So, I'm hoping we can work together to put forward a reasonable bill that makes sound investments in our law enforcement, our research capabilities, and our safety. But thank you. It's really a pleasure working with my chair and the chair of this subcommittee and our ranking member. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lowy, and I'll say I agree with you on legal services. They do important work. If we get a budget, we're counting on a bigger overall budget deal, hopefully give us a little more room to take care of some of these
Good.
important things. But right now, to get us out of subcommittee and get us moving down the road, we'll work together, arm in arm
Mr.
on these
Chairman, if I
things.
may briefly bring up a point that I brought up before to you, but I think it's important to remember. And I keep mentioning, and I'm sorry that I look like I'm playing favorites, I keep mentioning Chairman Rogers, because he and I did some good stuff together. After 9/11, a lot of money went to the FBI, and rightfully so. He was our leader, Chairman Rogers. I agree with him, we did it. Years later, we asked, I don't know, I asked, but I don't know who was chairman, Mr. Wolf, Mr. Rogers, Director Mueller, if he thought that the emphasis on the 9/11 aftermath had taken away from white-collar crimes, public corruption, and so on. And he admitted that there had been a drop. So I think one of the things we have to do, and it's going to require a balancing act, because I'm all in favor of going after those bad guys first. But we also have to understand that there are other kinds of bad guys who sell drugs in our community and who do other things. And I know Mr. Rogers understands that because he's got a serious issue with that drug issues in his community too. So to remind them that there's double duty.
Thank you. You bet. You're exactly right, Mr. Serrano. Thank you so much. Any other members would like to? Mr. Rogers?
Mr. Chairman, congratulations on a great bid.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You-
Thank you for all your guidance and
You
help.
had some hard cuts to have to deal with, and there are certain things I would have liked to seen increased or not cut as much. But you had no choice, and you've done good with what you had to work with.
Thank you.
I'm especially pleased to see the numbers for FBI, for DEA, and for the law enforcement agencies. We've got this horrendous drug problem that affects every one of our districts, and it's an indiscriminate killer. We've got more people dying now of overdose prescription medicine than car wrecks.
And we're killed in Vietnam.
What?
There were more people died of opioid overdoses last year than were killed in the entire Vietnam War.
And most of the abuse is prescription medicine.
That's exactly right.
Not necessarily heroin or cocaine or the other drugs. It's prescription medicine now being laced with fentanyl, an artificial opioid from China. 90% of the coca leaves are harvested in Colombia and thence through Mexico, with organized crime in Mexico being the carrier. And we're not making any progress. In fact, we're going deeper in the hole every day on the number of people dying from overdose. So thank you for beefing up those agencies
Yes,
that
sir.
primarily deal with criminal enforcement. We've got to deal with the other side of the opioid problem, and that is treatment and prevention, which will come in Tom Cole's bill, hopefully, among others. But you've done good.
Thank you,
And,
sir.
I wish you had more enthusiasm for your job. But it's good to be with my old buddy from the Brooklyn. And Joe Serrano has been a joy to deal with over the years on this subcommittee, among others. But this is my favorite subcommittee. I sat on it beginning in 1983, ranking on it for forever, and then finally chairing it a couple of times. But anyway, I envy you this chair.
Thank you, sir.
By the way, Chairman Rogers, I'm from the Bronx. That's the one that still has a team. Brooklyn's the one that lost the team.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Rogers. We've not only focused on opioids, but we're also going after the doctors that prescribe them. And we're hammering, going after human trafficking of these poor young women that have been sold into slavery. It's just intolerable, and we're going after that problem as well very aggressively. We couldn't do it without this superb staff. We're blessed to have a terrific staff led by John and Bob, on all of them working together. Really do great work. I welcome anyone else who'd like to be recognized. Mr. Kilmer.
Thanks, Chairman, and I'll echo the gratitude to the staff on both sides for the great work, and I thank you and our ranking member for the leadership on this subcommittee. I know we're working under very tight constraints, and I guess that adds my gratitude for some of the components that were included in this bill. Thank you for working with many of us on things like the Sea Grant program and keeping the Minority Business Development Agency afloat. That's a big deal. We have a operation in Tacoma, and I got to visit with them, and it was really inspiring, and they're doing really terrific work. Also want to thank you for including funding for the tsunami warning centers. As we've talked about before, that is a real concern for those of us on the coast. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention salmon. The Pacific Coast Salmon Recovery Funding is just incredibly important culturally, economically, to tribal and non-tribal communities in my region. And I know Congressman Herrera Butler, who was on this subcommittee too, would echo that gratitude. So I want to thank you for that. I want to just briefly echo the comments of Congressman Lowy about the Economic Development Administration. The EDA is a big deal for particularly in rural areas like mine, where it can provide really important federal partnership. And my hope is that going forward we can see that those cuts restored. Also, I just wanted to voice some disappointment that the bill doesn't provide any funds for fishery disasters and the coastal zone management grants, which were funded at half of last year's level. That continues to be a concern. Those are essential for the coastal communities and the fishing communities in my neck of the woods. But again, I just want to thank you and Ranking Member Serrano and the staff for the terrific work on this and the hard work on this. Thank you.
There's so much good in this bill. It's always hard to find ways to, when we get a tough allocation, until we get a big budget deal, it's going to be tough, but we're working it. Anyone else want to be sure to have an opportunity to recognize anyone? Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Chairman Culberson and Chairman Frelinghuysen. Chairman Culberson, I appreciate the difficulty you face putting together this bill with limited funds and an awful lot of really worthy projects. I also appreciate the really good hearings that you held on this. For those of us who are new on the subcommittee, they were eye openers. I appreciate that. So many portions of the bill I do think are fair and support important programs, robust funding for NASA, NSF, trade enforcement, law enforcement. I support those with a full throat. But I do have concerns about some of the things that have been mentioned: the COPS program, Economic Development Agency, legal services, to be sure. But I wanted to mention a couple in particular that I hope you'll think about some more. The Manufacturing Extension Partnership. We had Secretary Ross in, and I asked him about that. I think that's such an important program. It's a job creator. We need to be doing everything we can think of in this nation to build up and support our manufacturing base. In support of the recommended cuts, Secretary Ross kind of gave us the verbal equivalent of shrugging his shoulders, which I think is not enough. It's not a sufficient answer. Secondly, I'm concerned this bill drastically does undercut our ability to study, understand, and respond to the grave threat of climate change. Climate work at both NOAA and NASA is funded at levels that will dramatically damage the critical work that these agencies conduct in that area. Climate change is truly an existential threat to our planet and all future generations. We don't have a choice but to step up and meet this challenge. I know we pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, but American corporations, a lot of them refused to and say we're still in and took that pledge. I think we ought to pay attention to what American businessmen and women are telling us. It is, at a minimum, we ought to continue to fund climate science in this bill at the relatively modest levels we have done in the past. I hope to work with you as this process continues and find the funds for our climate programs, help build our understanding of climate change and resilience and adaptability that go along with those things. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ms. Ming.
I too want to thank our chairman and ranking member, and especially the committee staff for your tremendous work and working diligently to put together today's bill. I am pleased that this bill includes $5 million for the Children of Incarcerated Parents Demonstration Program, which goes to reduce recidivism, and full funding for the Public Safety Officer Benefits Program. These programs highlight our commitment to supporting our law enforcement officers and first responders. It also shows our commitment to investing in strong community-based programs and will have a long-term impact on efforts to reduce recidivism, though I would have liked to see more of these types of programs funded in this bill. I'm also pleased that this bill and report include multiple priorities requested by the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, such as strong funding for the Minority Business Development Agency and language addressing ongoing issues with how the Census Bureau plans to reach and assist people responding to census surveys who primarily speak API languages. Spanish, and other languages where there are large populations of speakers who have limited English proficiency. Unfortunately, the marginal increase to the Census Bureau is well under what is actually needed to properly prepare for the 2020 decennial census. I do want to echo other areas of concern in this bill that my colleagues have mentioned, particularly the drastic cuts to the Legal Services Corporation, and I want to thank you for mentioning that you're willing to expand our work on that, and also area of concerns of funding for climate science research. I look forward to continuing to work together to find common ground on these issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ming. If there are no other comments, at this time I'd like to recognize Mr. Jenkins for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that the chairman's mark be reported to the full committee.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and with that, the bill is passed, Mr. Chairman, to the full committee, and without objection, the bill is approved, and I would ask unanimous consent that if staff be authorized to make technical and conforming adjustments to the bill as needed. And I would like to ask members if you would, to please leave your bill and the committee report here on the table. The bill is, of course, online and available, and the committee report will be posted 24 hours in advance of the full committee hearing. And I look forward to working with each and every one of you, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the trust you've invested in me. And the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Good job, John.
Thank you very much. It really is a joy.
Martens, you did pretty well, too. No, good job.
He's a keeper.
Jose?
He's a keeper. All of them are. Hal, thank
Great
you so
job,
much,
staff.
Mr. Chairman. It really is a lot of fun. This is a great committee. Thank you. You know, when Tom DeLay